Hey, what's going on, Victory Life Church? It's Pastor Aaron, and I'm here to bring you to the next step, the final step in our PRIDE acronym. And so just for a recap, if this is you coming into this video, I want to recap what these kind of mean for a second, but to prepare to pray and as we come into reading and studying the scripture, then identifying different things that jump out to you on the page as you're reading the scripture, and then to dive in. So to really study what those things mean and to find out who's the author, who's he talking to, all those different contextual things that are going to help you figure out what's being said in the scripture. And then also to engage your heart. If this is you coming into this video right now, go back to the other videos and really find out what those steps look like, so then you can come to this step, engaging your heart, and really know how to apply the scriptures. So this concept of engaging your heart, what does this mean? This is really the application portion of studying the scripture. This is the final portion. Now that you have dove in, you've identified different key things in the passages, you figured out observations. Now, how do I take these observations and apply them to my life? You want to begin by asking a few different questions. A couple of those questions are actually on your study guide, and it asks why God has preserved these words for you to read today. Another is ask God what you're to do with what He's speaking to you. If I could provide this in a different way, what is God saying to me today? How can I apply what I just read to my own personal life? And what changes do I need to make? And then lastly, is there an action that I need to take from what I've just learned? Someone once told me, begin to ask God when you pray, as you come to this point in your study, God, what should I do with what I just read or what I just heard? And so I want to speak to what Pastor Otto observed last week in John 12, verses 12 through 19. And I want to specifically talk about the verse that he observed that really jumped out to him in verse 16. And it reads here, his disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written about him and had been done to him. You know, Jesus is coming in on a donkey. They're laying down palm trees. And this is something that had been referenced back in the Old Testament, been prophesied about Jesus. But these disciples didn't really understand what was going on here. And so there are a few different moments to observe and then apply and engage our hearts with. You see, the disciples didn't quite understand yet what was happening. And I love that it says at the end of that first sentence, these things at first. They didn't understand these things at first. So that tells me that there was a moment that they had a realization. It was after Jesus was glorified that they had a realization that these things had been written about Jesus, that they'd been done to Jesus. And so I really resonated with what Pastor Otto had observed, that this was kind of referring to their spiritual walk. And I can relate that to myself. I'm sure you can relate that to yourselves, that there are periods in time in our spiritual journey that we don't quite understand what Jesus is doing in our life or doing in the life of others. But there's also moments of realization that begins to happen when you commit to the process. Our spiritual journey is a process. And in our culture right now, it's so tough to commit to a process because we want things right now. In our culture, you could order a package off of Amazon and have it the very next day. What I'm kind of referring to, if I can give you an analogy, is a microwave culture where our spiritual life is more like a slow cooker. It takes time. And you need to give it time. It's a process to come to that end goal, to become more like Jesus. You have to be able to commit to that process. And so these disciples had that moment where they didn't quite understand, but they did end up coming to a realization. And for our lives, we need to realize that for our spiritual journey, that as we dig into the scripture, as we continue praying and committing to the process of spiritual formation within the context of our relationship with Jesus, that it's a process and it takes time. So keep studying, keep learning, keep digging in, diving in, keep committing to this process of studying the scripture, and I promise you that Jesus is going to show you some things. Thank you so much.